The acceptance letter trembled in my hands, the prestigious letterhead of Westmore Academy swimming before my eyes. My daughter's name was printed in crisp, formal type, Elizabeth Morgan. But I had never applied for her to attend this place. I'd never even heard of it until 30 minutes ago, when my stepsister slid the envelope across the dinner table with a look that said she knew exactly what bomb she was detonating. "I believe this belongs to you, Claire," Mia had said, her voice cutting through the Sunday dinner chatter. "I found it in Mother's desk when I was looking for stamps." Now, as the silence around the table stretched like an overwound clock spring ready to snap, I finally found my voice. "Alexandra," I said, using my stepmother's full name deliberately, "would you care to explain why there's an acceptance letter for my daughter to a boarding school I never applied to?" Glass clinking against china was the only sound as everyone at the dinner table froze. My father's fork stopped midway to his mouth. My stepmother's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her wine glass. And my 12-year-old daughter Elizabeth, the unwitting center of this drama, looked up from her phone with sudden interest, her blue eyes, so like her late father's, widening as she realized something big was happening. "I was going to discuss it with you after we'd secured her place," Alexandra said smoothly, dabbing her lips with her napkin as if we were discussing nothing more significant than a change in dinner plans. "Westmore is extremely competitive. They only accept applications with family connections, and as you know, I'm an alumna. The opportunity was too good to pass up." The audacity stole my breath. "You enrolled my child in a boarding school without even mentioning it to me?" Her mother. Alexandra's steel-gray eyes met mine without flinching. "You're too soft with her education, Claire. Elizabeth is gifted, but your child-led learning philosophy is wasting her potential. Westmore will give her structure, discipline, connections." Elizabeth's face drained of color. "Boarding school? Like, I'd have to live there?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and I felt a surge of protective rage. My daughter had already lost her father to cancer 3 years ago. Now my stepmother wanted to ship her off to strangers? "Mother, how could you?" Mia's voice was low, shaking with an emotion I'd rarely heard from my usually composed stepsister. "After what happened to me there?" It was Alexandra's turn to pale slightly, a crack appearing in her perfect facade. "That was different, Mia. Times have changed. What happened to you there?" I asked Mia, suddenly realizing there were depths to my stepsister I had never known, despite living under the same roof since I was 16. "Nothing that Alexandra likes to acknowledge," Mia replied bitterly. "But I still wake up crying sometimes, 15 years later." My father finally found his voice. "Alex, you had no right to do this without discussing it with Claire. Elizabeth is her daughter." "Robert, please," Alexandra's tone was dismissive. "You've always let Claire do whatever she wants. That's why she's living back here at 35, isn't it? No career, widowed, completely dependent on us. Is that what you want for Elizabeth?" The barb struck deep. I had moved back to my father's house with Elizabeth after Ryan died, overwhelmed by grief and medical bills. It was supposed to be temporary, but 2 years had stretched into 3. I'd built a modest online business as a graphic designer, but it didn't generate enough for us to live independently in this expensive area with its excellent public schools. Alexandra had made it clear from day one that she considered my return an imposition, despite the sprawling 6-bedroom house having plenty of space. "You've made your disapproval of me quite clear over the years, Alexandra," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "But this crosses every line. Elizabeth is my child. Mine. Not yours to make life-altering decisions for." Elizabeth pushed away from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I don't want to go to boarding school." Her voice held a note of panic. "Mom, you won't make me, right?" "Of course not, sweetheart," I assured her immediately, reaching for her hand. "You're not going anywhere." Alexandra's laugh was soft but cutting. "And that's precisely the problem. You cave to her every wish. Elizabeth needs guidance, structure, challenge, not a mother who says yes to everything because she feels guilty about depriving her child of a father." The deliberate cruelty of that statement sliced through the room. My father gasped. Mia muttered something that sounded like, "Jesus Christ, Mother." Even Alexandra's biological son, my stepbrother Tyler, who had remained silent until now, looked uncomfortable. But it was Elizabeth's face that broke my heart, shock, hurt, and a dawning understanding of adult ugliness too heavy for her 12 years. "How dare you," I whispered, a calm settling over me that felt dangerous. "How dare you use Ryan's death as a weapon against me?" Alexandra waved a dismissive hand. "I'm merely stating facts. Since Ryan died, you've turned Elizabeth into the center of your universe. You let her dictate her own education with this ridiculous homeschooling experiment this past year. You let her drop piano when it got difficult. I let her grieve," I interrupted, my voice rising. "I let her be a child who lost her father to a brutal illness that she watched consume him for 2 years. I gave her space to heal, to find joy again. And yes, I let her help design her own education because she's brilliant and curious, and conventional schooling was crushing her spirit while she was dealing with the greatest loss of her life." "She's falling behind," Alexandra insisted. "She's 2 grade levels ahead in math and science," I countered. "She's reading at a high school level. She's learning coding and Spanish, both of which she chose herself. She needs proper socialization. She has the theater group, swim team, and her science club. She has friends. What she needs is stability and family who support her, not someone shipping her off because her methods don't match some outdated educational philosophy from the 1950s. Alexandra's nostrils flared. "Westmore Academy is the finest preparatory school on the East Coast. I pulled significant strings to get her the spot." Without asking her mother, my father interjected, his disappointment evident. "Because I knew Claire would say no without considering what's best for Elizabeth's future," Alexandra snapped. "Some decisions shouldn't be left to parents who can't see beyond their emotional attachments." I stood slowly, placing both palms on the table. "Elizabeth and I will be packing our things tonight. We'll be gone by morning." A stunned silence followed my declaration. "Don't be ridiculous," Alexandra finally said. "Where would you go? You can barely afford Elizabeth's extracurriculars, let alone rent in this area." "We'll figure it out," I said, though panic fluttered beneath my determined words. Leaving meant pulling Elizabeth from her support network, possibly changing school districts if we had to move far enough away. But staying after this felt impossible. The betrayal was too deep, the boundary violation too severe. "Claire, wait," my father pleaded. "Let's discuss this rationally. Alex was wrong to go behind your back, but surely we can work this out without you leaving. Can we?" I looked at him directly. "Because this isn't a one-time overstep. This is the culmination of years of Alexandra undermining my parenting, criticizing my choices, and treating me like an incompetent child rather than an adult and a mother." Elizabeth had tears streaming down her face now. "I don't want to go to boarding school, but I don't want to leave Grandpa and Aunt Mia and Uncle Tyler either." Mia surprised me then by standing up and moving to put an arm around Elizabeth's shoulders. "No one's making any decisions tonight," she said firmly, with a pointed look at both me and Alexandra. "Why don't you go upstairs for a bit, Lizzie? The adults need to talk." Elizabeth looked to me for confirmation, and I nodded, grateful for Mia's intervention. After she left, Mia turned to her mother. "You will rescind that application immediately," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "And then you're going to listen to what I have to say about Westmore Academy and why no child in this family will ever set foot there." Alexandra's face registered genuine shock at her daughter's defiance. "Mia." "No." Mia cut her off. "For years I've kept quiet about what happened to me there because you made it clear you didn't want to hear it. You dismissed every attempt I made to tell you. But I won't let you do the same thing to Elizabeth." My curiosity about Mia's experience was overwhelming, but I held my questions. Whatever she had to say, it was clearly difficult for her. "Perhaps this isn't the right setting," Alexandra said stiffly, glancing at me and my father. "It's exactly the right setting," Mia countered. "Because Claire needs to understand exactly what kind of place you tried to send her daughter to, and Dad needs to understand why I came home junior year as a shell of myself." My father looked stricken. "Mia, what are you talking about?" Mia took a deep breath. "Westmore presents itself as elite and traditional. What they don't advertise is that their methods for ensuring compliance and academic excellence include systematic humiliation, isolation, and psychological manipulation. Alexandra scoffed. You're being melodramatic. It's a prestigious academy that produces Ivy League graduates. It's a place where I was locked in a supply closet for 6 hours because I questioned a teacher's interpretation of a historical event, Mia said flatly. Where girls with learning disabilities were publicly ridiculed until they broke down in tears. Where I was forced to stand in the dining hall and list all my inadequacies because my uniform skirt was an inch too short. The blood drained from my face. My God, Mia. That can't be true, my father whispered, horror etched on his features. Alex, did you know about this? Adolescent exaggeration, Alexandra dismissed, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. Every school has strict disciplinary measures. I tried to tell you, Mia's voice cracked. When I begged to come home. When I started pulling out my hair. When I stopped eating. You told me to toughen up, that I was embarrassing you with my weakness. I felt physically ill. Though Mia and I had never been particularly close, she was already in college when my father married Alexandra and I moved in as a teenager. I'd always respected her poise and accomplishments. Now I saw them in a new light, not as the products of a privileged education, but as hard-won triumphs over trauma. Is this true, Alexandra? My father's voice had gone dangerously quiet. In the 20 years he'd been married to her, I'd rarely heard him use that tone. Alexandra's composure finally slipped. Robert, you have to understand, my family had attended Westmore for generations. The methods are strict, yes, but they produce excellence. When Mia started struggling, I assumed it was normal adjustment difficulties. I sent you detailed letters, Mia said. About the girl who attempted suicide. About the teacher who made us kneel on rice for speaking during study hall. About the weekly weigh-ins and the public announcing of our weights if we gained. Alexandra's face had gone ashen. I thought you were being dramatic to manipulate me into bringing you home. And that's what you wanted for Elizabeth? I asked, unable to keep the horror from my voice. A 12-year-old who's still healing from watching her father die? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Alexandra's features. Westmore's reputation is stellar. Their academic results come at the expense of children's mental health and basic dignity, Mia finished. I've spent 15 years in therapy working through what happened there. My therapist calls it institutional abuse. Tyler, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. That's why you fought Mom so hard when she suggested sending me there after Dad died, isn't it? He asked Mia. I'd forgotten that piece of family history. My father was Alexandra's second husband, and her first husband had died when Tyler was young. Mia nodded. I threatened to become your legal guardian if she tried. The pieces were falling into place. Mia's protectiveness of Tyler, her distance from her mother, her occasional cryptic comments about her school years that I'd never fully understood. My father stood abruptly. Alexandra, I think you should go upstairs. I need to process what I've just learned. Alexandra looked stunned. In 2 decades of marriage, I'd never seen my mild-mannered father dismiss her from his presence. Robert, please. His voice was firm but trembling slightly. I cannot look at you right now without wondering how you could ignore your own child's suffering and then try to inflict the same on my granddaughter. Alexandra rose with as much dignity as she could muster, her spine rigid. You're all overreacting. Westmore is a respected institution. I only wanted what's best. Go, my father said, in a tone that silenced her. After a moment's hesitation, she left the dining room, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. In the silence that followed, I studied Mia with new eyes. I had no idea, I said softly. All these years, and I never knew. I don't talk about it, she replied, equally quiet. But I couldn't let her do it to Elizabeth. Not when I could stop it. My father buried his face in his hands. I should have known. When you came home junior year, you were so different. I asked Alex what happened, and she said typical teenage rebellion, that you'd adjust. It wasn't your fault, Dad, Mia assured him. Mother is extraordinarily convincing when she wants to be. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I've always thought you had the perfect life, Mia. Successful career, beautiful apartment in the city, confidence. I've been envious, if I'm honest. A sad smile crossed her face. I worked hard for all of that precisely because Westmore convinced me I was worthless unless I achieved perfection. It's not a healthy motivation. Tyler reached across the table to squeeze his sister's hand. I never knew either. I'm sorry, Mia. She squeezed back. It's okay. But now you all understand why I intercepted that letter. When I saw Westmore's crest, I knew exactly what Mother was trying to do. I felt a fresh surge of gratitude. Thank you for protecting Elizabeth. She's family, Mia said simply. And she deserves better. My father looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. Claire, please don't leave. This house is as much yours as it is Alexandra's. You and Elizabeth belong here, with family who loves you. I hesitated. Dad, I appreciate that. But Alexandra has made it clear how she feels about my parenting, about me living here. The dynamic is toxic. Then Alexandra can adjust her attitude or find somewhere else to be, he said with surprising firmness. I've allowed her to dominate this household for too long. I've allowed her to create tension between you and me. That ends tonight. I blinked in surprise. My father had always been loving but passive, especially when it came to conflicts with his wife. This newfound backbone was unexpected. This isn't just about the boarding school, I explained carefully. It's about years of subtle and not-so-subtle criticism, implications that I'm failing Elizabeth, that my parenting is inadequate. And I've sat by while it happened, my father acknowledged heavily. I'm sorry, Claire. I should have defended you and your choices more strongly. You're an amazing mother. What you've done to help Elizabeth through losing Ryan, it's been nothing short of heroic. His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed. Mia leaned forward. Claire, I have a suggestion. Why don't you and Elizabeth move into the guest house? It's basically a separate home, but you'd still be close. You'd have your own space, your own rules, complete autonomy. And Elizabeth wouldn't have to leave her friends or activities. The guest house was a charming two-bedroom cottage at the edge of the property. My father had used it as an art studio before his arthritis made painting too difficult. It was small but lovely, with a kitchenette and its own entrance. That could work, I said slowly. But what about Alexandra? Let me handle Alexandra, my father said with new resolution. It's time she and I had some serious conversations about respect, boundaries, and what it means to be a family. Tyler nodded. And I'll back you up, Dad. Mom needs to understand she can't dictate everyone's lives. And if she tries anything like this again, Mia added, I'm perfectly prepared to go public with my Westmore experience. I doubt they'd appreciate an alumna detailing their abusive practices. I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I was carrying, the weight of trying to parent under constant scrutiny and criticism, of defending my choices while doubting myself, of walking on eggshells in what should have been my home. I should check on Elizabeth, I said, rising from the table. She must be confused and upset. I'll come with you, Mia offered. I think she might have questions about Westmore, and it might help to hear from someone who was there that she's not missing anything wonderful. As we headed upstairs, I touched Mia's arm. Thank you, not just for stopping this, but for being brave enough to share what happened to you. I know that couldn't have been easy. She gave me a sad smile. I've spent too many years protecting my mother from the consequences of her actions. It stops now. We found Elizabeth in her room, curled up on her window seat with her knees drawn to her chest, watching videos on her tablet with headphones. When she saw us, she pulled them off, her expression wary. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart, not at all, I assured her, sitting beside her and pulling her into a hug. You've done absolutely nothing wrong. Is Grandma really sending me away? Her voice was small, and it broke my heart. No, I said firmly. That is never going to happen. No one makes decisions about your life except you and me, okay? She nodded against my shoulder, relief evident in the loosening of her tense muscles. I heard yelling. There was some intense discussion, I acknowledged. But it was all adults dealing with adult problems. Nothing for you to worry about. Mia perched on the edge of Elizabeth's bed. Your grandmother thought she was doing something helpful, but she was wrong. And now she knows that. Elizabeth studied Mia curiously. You went to that school? At Mia's nod, she continued, was it really bad? Mia considered her words carefully. It was a place that didn't understand that all children are different, with different needs and different ways of learning. They tried to make everyone the same, and that hurt a lot of us. Elizabeth seemed to process this. Is that why you never talk about high school? I've heard you talk about college lots, but never high school. Mia looked surprised at Elizabeth's perceptiveness. That's exactly why. It wasn't a happy time for me. I'm glad you saved me from going there, Elizabeth said quietly. I don't want to leave Mom. Not after Dad. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. You won't have to, I promised. But we might be making a small change. How would you feel about us moving into the guest house? We'd still be here on the property, but we'd have our own space, just the two of us. Elizabeth's eyes widened. The little cottage with the blue door? I love that place. Could I paint my room however I want? I laughed, relieved at her enthusiasm. Absolutely. Any color you like. Even if Grandma doesn't approve, she pressed, revealing how aware she was of the tensions in the household. Especially if Grandma doesn't approve, Mia said with a conspiratorial wink that made Elizabeth giggle. Why don't you start thinking about what you'd want your room to look like? I suggested. Maybe make some sketches or a Pinterest board? Elizabeth immediately brightened, reaching for her tablet. Can I have fairy lights? And one of those hanging chairs. We'll see what we can do, I promised, grateful for her resilience. As she began excitedly searching for room inspiration, Mia motioned for me to join her in the hallway. She's going to be okay, Mia said quietly once we were outside. Kids are remarkably adaptable, especially when they feel secure in their parents' love. I hope so, I sighed. I can't believe Alexandra would do something like this. I knew she disapproved of my parenting, but to go behind my back on something so significant. My mother has always believed she knows best, Mia said. For everyone. It took me years to understand that her controlling behavior comes from her own insecurities. She's terrified of being seen as a failure, so she micromanages everyone around her to create the perfect family image. That doesn't excuse what she did, I pointed out. No, it doesn't, Mia agreed. But understanding it might help you deal with her going forward. Because despite what happened today, she's still family. I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. I don't know if I can forgive this, Mia. I'm not suggesting forgiveness, she clarified. I'm suggesting boundaries. Very firm, very clear boundaries, with consequences when she crosses them. From downstairs came the sound of raised voices, my father and Alexandra having what sounded like their first real argument in decades. I've never heard Dad stand up to her like this, I marveled. It's long overdue, Mia said. For all of us. Later that evening, after Elizabeth had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea, trying to process the day's events. The house was quiet now, Alexandra having retreated to the guest bedroom after her argument with my father, an unprecedented development in their marriage. The back door opened, and my father stepped in, looking weary but resolved. He'd gone for one of his evening walks, something he did when he needed to clear his head. May I join you? He asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. I nodded, pushing the teapot toward him. He poured himself a cup and added his customary single sugar cube, stirring methodically as he collected his thoughts. I've let you down, he finally said. For years, I've allowed Alexandra to undermine you, to make you feel unwelcome in what should be your home too. I convinced myself I was keeping the peace, but really, I was just avoiding conflict at your expense. Dad. He held up a hand. Please let me finish. When your mother died and I eventually married Alexandra, I worried so much about you having a stable family that I overlooked the ways she wasn't fully accepting you. Then when Ryan died and you needed to come home, I was so focused on not overstepping as you parented Elizabeth that I didn't protect either of you from Alexandra's criticism. I felt a lump form in my throat. We've both been trying to avoid rocking the boat. Well, the boat is thoroughly rocked now, he said with a wry smile. Alexandra and I will be attending marriage counseling if she wants to remain in this marriage. And regardless, some things are changing immediately. The guest house is yours for as long as you want it. I've already called a contractor about updating the kitchen and bathroom. Dad, you don't have to. I want to, he insisted. It should have been offered to you the moment you moved back. A grown woman needs her own space, especially one raising a child. I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. Thank you. There's more, he continued. I'm setting up a trust for Elizabeth's education, college, yes, but also any special programs, summer camps, or resources she needs for her current schooling approach. Alexandra will have no say in how it's used. That will be entirely between you and me. Tears sprang to my eyes. This was more than a practical solution. It was a profound vote of confidence in my parenting decisions. I've been watching how you parent Elizabeth, he said softly. The way you encourage her curiosity, how you've helped her through her grief while honoring her need to move forward, how you balance structure with freedom. It's remarkable, Claire. I couldn't be prouder of the mother you've become. The validation I'd been unconsciously craving for years washed over me like a healing balm. That means everything to me, Dad. I've been second-guessing myself so much, especially with Alexandra's constant implications that I'm doing it wrong. You're not, he said firmly. You're giving Elizabeth exactly what she needs, security, love, and the confidence to find her own path. That's what parenting should be. What about Alexandra? I asked. Do you think she'll accept these changes? He sighed deeply. She doesn't have much choice. This situation has forced me to see some hard truths about our marriage and about who Alexandra is. What she did wasn't just a boundary violation with you. It revealed a fundamental disrespect for you as a mother and as a person. And what she did to Mia. I couldn't even finish the thought. I'm still processing that, my father admitted, pain etching lines around his eyes. To think my wife would dismiss her own daughter's suffering and then try to send my granddaughter to the same environment? It's shaken everything I thought I knew about her. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around us. What if Alexandra doesn't change? I finally asked the question that had been worrying me. What if she undermines these new boundaries? Then she and I will have to reevaluate our future together, he said with quiet determination. I love my wife, Claire, but I won't sacrifice my daughter and granddaughter's well-being for a peaceful marriage. Not anymore. In that moment, I saw my father clearly, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, not as the conflict-avoidant man who'd let his second wife subtly push his daughter to the periphery of his life, but as someone capable of growth, of acknowledging mistakes, of making difficult choices to protect those he loved. I love you, Dad, I said simply. I love you too, sweetheart. His eyes crinkled with the smile that had always made me feel safe as a child. We're going to make this right. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of voices in the garden below. Looking out, I saw Elizabeth and my father inspecting the guest house, gesturing animatedly at various features. Even from a distance, I could see the excitement on my daughter's face as she pointed to windows and doorways, clearly describing her vision for our new home. As I watched them, I felt a profound sense of possibility settling over me. The events of yesterday had been painful, explosive, revelatory, but they had cleared the air like a summer thunderstorm, washing away years of accumulated tension and unspoken resentments. There would be difficult conversations ahead. Alexandra and I would need to establish a new dynamic. My father and his wife had serious issues to work through. Mia was finally confronting trauma she'd buried for years. None of it would be easy. But for the first time since Ryan's death, perhaps even since my mother's death 2 decades ago, I felt fully seen and valued in this family. My voice had been heard. My boundaries respected. My parenting affirmed. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Breakfast at the cafe down the street? Just you and me. There's a lot more I'd like to talk about. I smiled, typing back an immediate yes. The unexpected alliance with my stepsister felt like the universe offering a silver lining to yesterday's dark clouds. As I got dressed, I heard the sound of Elizabeth's laughter floating up from the garden, bright, uninhibited, healing. It was the sound I'd fought so hard to preserve through all the grief and change of the past few years. the sound that Alexandra had nearly jeopardized with her misguided intervention. By the time I joined my daughter and father in the garden, they had already measured the guest house's small second bedroom and were debating the merits of various shades of blue paint. "Mom," Elizabeth called when she saw me. "Grandpa says I can have a window seat built in my new room. And he's going to help me design a bookshelf that goes all the way around the top of the walls, like a library." My father smiled somewhat sheepishly. "I hope that's okay with you." I might have gotten carried away with the possibilities. "It sounds perfect," I assured him, warmed by his enthusiasm. This project was his way of making amends, of building something positive from yesterday's conflict. Elizabeth tugged me toward the guest house door. "Come see. I've already figured out where all our stuff can go." As we stepped into what would become our new home, I felt none of the defeat or failure that might have accompanied this move under different circumstances. This wasn't a retreat or a downgrade. It was a step forward into a space that was truly ours, where we could set our own rules and live without constant judgment. "What do you think?" Elizabeth asked anxiously, watching my face as I surveyed the cozy living room with its bay window and window seat. "I think," I said, pulling her into a hug, "that this is exactly where we're meant to be right now." Over her shoulder, I caught my father's eye. He nodded, understanding the layers of meaning in my words. This guest house wasn't just a living arrangement. It was a statement about autonomy, about boundaries, about claiming our right to parent and live in the way that worked best for us. Alexandra might never fully understand or approve of my approach to raising Elizabeth. She might never see the value in the educational choices I'd made, the emphasis on healing and joy over rigid achievement metrics. But her approval was no longer something I needed, not when I had found my own confidence as a mother, not when I had allies who recognized and supported the choices I was making for my daughter. As Elizabeth darted from room to room, already envisioning our life in this new space, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Yesterday's confrontation had been painful but necessary, the labor pains of a new family dynamic being born, one with clearer boundaries, greater respect, and space for different approaches to flourish side by side. We had weathered the storm and emerged into unexpected sunshine. And for a family that had seen its share of loss and grief, that felt nothing short of miraculous.